Okay, welcome everybody to the latest edition of Ed Talks. I'm actually looking quite like my avatar for a change, wearing a suit, which doesn't happen very often. And before I explain why we're sitting here talking, just to introduce Alexander Ali, who's sitting here on my immediate left, who runs a company called Finch app.
That's correct, Finch, yep.
Which we'll explain more in a minute. And Tim, you've met before on one of my podcasts. Tim is the CEO of a company called Pips. They provide what is effectively a data room for the private treaty market. I'm on the edge talking because these are going to be the two important people who are being talked about. And a lot of you will be listening to this anyway, so you won't care where I sit. You will be well aware, I'm sure, as agents, who will be mostly the people listening to this, that very, very shortly, and we are rumoured, the rumours suggest that within the next couple of weeks, two very important things are going to happen. One is that trading standards are going to tell us what is going to form part of the material information required for estate agents to provide to buyers. We've had A in the past, which is very simple, price, tenure, EPC type information, but the B and C bits are the most important things, and that's going to be announced shortly. And the other thing that's happening is that the home buying and selling group is going to be giving a directive on how they see the future of this upfront information and how it's produced. And I think it is fair to say that the single most important thing that this is going to produce is not necessarily about what the information is, it's about how that information is going to be communicated to all the parties involved. And those listening or watching this know you've got a seller, a buyer, you've got a buyer's solicitor, a seller's solicitor, and then you've probably got some mortgage brokers. So there's an awful lot of serious people who need serious information. And at the moment, with property transactions taking, I'm not even going to try and quote what the periods are, it's ridiculous. It's sort of 3 or 4 times as long as it was when I started in this game in 1979. It's madness. This is all designed to speed that up. So that is 2 minutes explaining why we're talking about what we're talking about. I've explained that Pips produce a data room, which is going to be undoubtedly, to my mind, one of the simple, straightforward, agnostic type places people can go to stash information about a transaction. It could be anything from searches right the way through to simple information on white goods and all this sort of thing. But it can be accessed by anybody. So it doesn't matter whether you're a buyer, solicitor, a buyer, the agents, it doesn't matter. It can be accessed in one place. And that is going to be an incredibly important part of what the home buying and selling group is going to produce. And this is available straight away. The second bit, and the reason we're here talking about this together, is that what Alexander's company does at Finch is it effectively digitizes all the forms that people have got to use or could use in the process. You put those two things together and you've got a very large part in measure of what's going to be required and is going to put any of you ahead of the game with simple agnostic tech. So let me just get Alexander to explain briefly Finch. Tell me a bit about Finch and how it started.
Yes, of course. So Finch started in around 2021. My background has been in prop tech since 2008, and I've helped residential estate agents, mostly enterprise scale agents, in my career. I've been familiar with the data challenges that residential agents have faced, and we actually got started with collecting bank details as it happens. As we knew that bank details were coming in that were sometimes just provided incorrectly. Somebody receives it over the phone and they type it into their CRM wrong, and then suddenly, for instance, rent's going to the wrong bank account the first time that rent needs to be paid. So it was really about how can we get better quality data into estate agents, and digitization is the answer. And we see this with upfront information as well. So as we took that idea forwards and like, okay, we're going to collect bank details, it started to become more than that. It started to become, okay, we're going to collect everything about the customer. We'll find out all the information that we need to be compliant to get a property onto the market, to get a customer signed up with an estate agent. And we will do that in a way which is as digital as possible, as easy as possible for the customer. These days we help with a wide variety of data requirements for estate agents, and material information is part of that, which is why I'm here today.
Okay, well, thank you. If people want to go and look at it, it's finch-app.com, is that right?
That's correct, that's the web address, yeah.
Okay, so go and have a look at that. If you're listening or whatever, go and have a look at it. You'll see exactly what Alexander does. Tim, just refresh our memory as to what PIP vault, a PIP logbook, whatever you want to call it, what it is and what it can do?
A PIP vault is a very simple data room, but since we launched, we've added a number of features to it. So we now offer searches, so we can do funded searches. So from day one of instruction, we will actually fund the searches as long as we're paid on success at the end. So there's no actual cost to the seller on that. And I know, Ed, you've shared some fantastic figures before on the success of maybe even asking the buyer to pay actually at the point of sale for that. I think you get the benefits of a reservation agreement without any complicated legal document. And obviously material information is something else we can add into the PIP vault, and we're looking to add in hopefully shareable ID, so the ID for the seller can be done once, and then usually with the agent at the start of the process, but when a solicitor, mortgage broker comes along, surveyor, they've got their ID done, the seller, and they can share a link from the ID through the
Okay. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, I mean, somebody who listens to this will know that I'm a fan of what Tim's doing, and I think that anybody who's ever bought a property at auction is always amazed how you can buy a property at auction on the smashing of the gavel and wondering how on earth that works. And of course that works because anybody who's any potential buyer has access to a data room which has all the information in it. So what a PIP vault is very simply the same thing, but for the private treaty market. And indeed, one of the original founders and investors is someone who founded a company called the Essential Information Group. And if you're in auctions, the Essential Information Group is effectively the holy Bible for all the data that goes into the auction industry. So you'll see that it's a very, very well established proposition with tens of millions of downloads over the years for exactly this sort of thing. So the tech is there, ready to go and proven. So, Alexander, how do you think what you're doing can speed up? I mean, do you have any empirical figures about how it speeds things up? What's your view of what the perfect scenario would look like going forward? Give us a little bit about your view of how you can help and where you would like to be in a little bit of time.
So I think with what we do in terms of collecting information, it's not necessarily about it being faster. I think that certainty in the buying transaction is the priority overall. It's not to say that this is exclusive to speed. Some people would like to be very certain about their property transaction and have it done very quickly. But certainly knowing when my transaction will complete in a sale is important. If it's going to take 3 months, then it takes 3 months. But as long as I can plan for that, that's good for the consumer. So what I'm really referring to with our work is there are forms and paperwork to fill in. This has always been true with estate agents, with consumers. There's things to supply. But how do we gather this information in such a way that it's easy for the consumer to supply it, or the different parties involved in the transaction to supply it? And how can we do this in a way which improves the quality of the data that's being received? So part of the puzzle, I think, is getting information from authoritative data sources. So for instance, what can we collect from HM Land Registry? Well, clearly there's title registers and documentation and bits and pieces that we can pull in from that source. There's information that we can pull in from the EPC register. There's lots of different data sources out there where you can rely on the information that's being received. So Finch's role is really as a sort of data exchange, so to speak. This is collecting information from external sources who know information about my deal or information about my property or information about myself. It's also collecting information directly from these customers. So we'll ask them questions about what it is that their sale, that they are providing information about their property. And we will then effectively stamp that in a trustworthy way so that we know what information was collected from where, and begin that data lifecycle. Because I think that this conversation about data that we're having around property and improving the speed of property transactions, I see it in my head as 3 phases. There's the phase of the collection and origin of data. There's the transport of data, which is where and how it moves between the different parties involved in the transaction. And there's the storage of data. So, all the industry has to come together to solve these individual problems. So, on the PIP side, you have the data, the property logbooks, and there you're talking about the storage of data, but also that links back into the transport of data and how that then goes to other places like the portals, like the estate agents, like the lenders. But also that origin of data is very important as well, because that's where the trust chain begins, and the trust is a big, the trust part of this is half of the problem, because if I receive information, I need to know that it's verifiable.
Now, I think you can hear this man's quite passionate about what he does. One of the things I would say is that when you talk about the pulling in of the data, what you guys are doing is translating that into a digital format that everybody else can then see.
Absolutely.
That's the whole point.
So we take the data. As a user, I can log on to a form, a digital form, and I can input data points into that form. Because we hold that at the digital data point level, it's not going into a PDF or a big blob of information that then has to be technically retrieved again.
With a lot of storage,
we have
capacity.
We have
or
clarity over
Yeah.
what has been provided, who provided it, when was it provided, even what location was this piece of data provided in. Those sorts of data points and the metadata is all collected. What that then allows you to do is downstream, when you want to provide somebody else with information, it doesn't so much matter anymore whether it is a TA6 Law Society Property Information form or whether it was a BASPI format Home Buying and Selling Group form. You can take those data points and you can output them to the different way that the person on the other end wants to receive it. So if they want to receive the BASPI format information, they can receive that. If they prefer the TA6, they can receive that. If they want to receive machine readable information, you can use something like the Property Trust Data Framework, exchange of information. These data standards are crucial. Yeah. The data standards are going to be what solves these problems by the industry accepting a standard. So for instance, if you take finance and banking, they use an ISO standard to determine how a payment will be made. That's how all the different banks agree that when I make a payment to Tim, or he makes a payment to me, and we're on different banks, that actually works. I think we need similar things in this industry.
Well, I mean, I agree. I've been part of the industry forum and previously on the Property Ombudsman board, and I know there is an enormous amount of talking about this at the moment, and certainly the directives that the Home Buying and Selling Group are coming out with, and particularly the announcements on material information, are all very well. And one of the things I've been talking to Tim about in the past is the fact that it's all very well having all this information. And by the way, I think for the first time, what you're saying makes perfect sense. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, you're putting it in a format where people can share it quite easily. And that is what, to me, is simple and makes so much sense. What Tim and I were talking about in the past is the fact that there's lots of information coming up, but where the hell do you store it so everyone can get it? Originally, the concept of the data and the pit vault was very simplistic, which was just that it was going to be effectively a bucket where you could throw everything in and everyone could then look at the bucket and see what it was. Of course, that's a rather basic analogy. The fact now is that there are so many parties needing to plug into this that if they can plug into something which has got digitized, sensible data in a place where they can simply see it by being given a link and a password, that sounds to me like it's got to be the simplest thing. I mean, Tim talked earlier about the other bits and pieces going in. We're not here to talk about the ID and that sort of stuff for the moment, but I think this sounds like a really sensible methodology for... And what really excites me is the fact that people are waiting to hear what's going to happen. Actually, to be fair, a lot of you who are listening to this probably aren't waiting for it. You're just thinking, oh God, whenever it comes out, we'll think about it. But actually, you are going to have to do something with it. And if you can do something cheaply, I mean, I know from a data room perspective, is it free? How does it work, Tim?
It's free. Some of the services are a small subscription, but the vanilla service is free.
Yeah, it's free. And what about what you do? Expensive, cheap? How would you characterise it?
I characterise that we deliver the value that our agent customers expect. So in terms of the customers that we work with, when these changes come into effect, they know that we can deliver the updates to their onboarding forms very quickly, very easily, and that they will have the data entering their business that they need to remain compliant.
Okay, but give the listeners some idea of cost for this.
So some idea of cost for what we charge is around £20 a user. We find that most branches are paying around £30 to £40 for our services at the moment.
Okay, and that effectively buys them everything per transaction, does it?
Yes, that's right. So for that fee, the data that's coming into the business for things like customer onboarding, landlord onboarding, vendor onboarding, property information forms, tenancy offers, tenancy agreements. Even if you have a new homes department, new homes reservations, if you have a finance department, getting customer declarations and all sorts of different agreements into your business, we tend on a branch to find on a branch basis. That's the sort of fee area that we're in. Yeah.
And the thing is, with the amount of money people are talking about in terms of fee income, rents have been on the way up. So fee income from rentals is on the way up. It sounds like a fairly small price to pay for being compliant. Sensible. Well, one of the things you mentioned actually back there, which I think a lot of people forget about, is that the whole point of this exercise, and it might not bother you as a seller, but as an agent it should be helpful further on down the line, is that of course once you've got all that information, it's stored somewhere sensibly where you can then have access to it in the future.
That's correct.
Which I know is half the point of a logbook, but I mean, it's what you're talking about being able to provide for a relatively modest sum. I mean, I would have thought that what you've got, you could be producing for a very small annual subscription with everything in it.
Absolutely. I think logbooks are seen as the store, but I think with technology as it is nowadays, it's not just a filing cabinet. Sometimes it's a filing cabinet with a link to somewhere else, because actually often you want to be looking at live data. So if I use a council tax as an example, you want to press a button and not see what your council tax was 5 years ago when you bought the place. You want to see what the current payment rate is now.
Well, I know what we at Douglas and Gordon used to call the X cycle. When I first started in 1979, I think everyone moved about every sort of 2 or 3 years. I think now it's about, I forgot what the figure is, it's something like 17 years or something horrendous. So you definitely will need to. But of course, a lot of people do move more often than that. And people forget that you pay this money to have all these forms digitised. I say all this money, you pay a relatively modest sum to have it digitised. Then you put it in a logbook, in a data room, logbook, whatever. And it's there for forever. It can just be passed on at nominal cost. So,
well, we see a logbook is for a property's life. So you might even start with the original building, if it's a new building drawings, materials, everything else.
Yeah.
And 3 owners down the line, they might want to do some renovations, or changes, alterations, extensions. They've got the information to tie into. They write down to the building drawings. It's going to make a huge...
Well, look, I'm very pleased to be able to sit here with these guys and talk about something that is clearly very simple. It's clearly very topical because you're about to hear all the announcements on it, and it is going to be recommended, I think, that certainly these 2 parts, i.e. the ability to have somewhere where everybody can communicate from a central place and to have the information digitised, those are going to be 2 of the most important things. And you can get those both, well, I would hesitate to suggest at the moment you can get them all in one place. I know these 2 guys are talking at the moment, but do go and have a look at piphome.co.uk and finch-app.com. So go and have a look at what these guys are doing. And I really think that actually, if you were to go and look at this as you're reading this, you'd almost be ready to go by the end of the month when these announcements are made. And you can turn around and say, yep, we're good to go. Thanks very much for listening.